Legally speaking, he's one of the founding fathers.
He's the only Supreme Court justice in the history of the court who was more famous for what he did before rising to justice.
There's no one in this country who hasn't been touched by Thurgood Marshall's genius.
That's an excerpt from a new Maryland Public Television documentary called Becoming Thurgood, America's Social Architect. It traces the life and legacy of Justice Thurgood Marshall. While some people know Marshall primarily as the first African American U.S. Supreme Court justice, he had a long career with the American Civil Liberties Union and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Recently, I gathered at Marshall University with students, community members, and a panel of experts to watch excerpts from the program and reflect on Thurgood Marshall's life and legacy. Just a note, the university is named after the nation's fourth Chief Justice, John Marshall. As our event unfolded, the weight of Thurgood Marshall's legacy was evident. Not just in the sweep of national civil rights history, but in how those struggles unfolded in West Virginia. The effects of Marshall's work have shaped classrooms, courtrooms, and communities across the Mountain State. And the fight for equal protection and opportunity is far from finished. So today we're sharing segments from our event with you, not just to revisit the documentary, but to reflect on what Thurgood Marshall's work asks from us now. From West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX, this is Us and Them, the show that tells the stories about the things that divide us, and in some cases, brings us together. I'm Trey Kay. I begin our conversation with one of our three panel guests, Dr. Cicero Fain III, who's the Assistant Provost for Inclusive Excellence at Marshall University. Fain is a leading historian of Black life in Central Appalachia, and I asked him about the influences that helped shape Marshall's work.
I guess I'm curious, how did those building blocks play out here in Appalachia?
It's a very good question. I think, at least in terms of West Virginia, we have a rich history of scholars and lawyers who attacked the racialized status quo. So we can start with J.R. Clifford, the first African American lawyer in the state. Here's a man of great intelligence, great passion, civil rights presence and identity, and he sees a state that is not adhering to its constitution and is segregating and treating black people with inferiority. What he does then is utilizes the law, like Thurgood Marshall, to attack and ameliorate the obstacles of Jim Crowism that exists in the state.
So he's somebody who existed long before Thurgood Marshall, and
yes.
He was actually addressing this fight going back to the beginning of the last century?
Correct,
okay.
Correct. And what emerges is that he's just one of many. A legacy that follows from him would include Harry Capehart, who challenges lynching in the state. 1921 establishes the Capehart anti-lynching bill. West Virginia is one of the few states that actually has legislation that passes that outlaws lynching. Now, that doesn't mean that lynching stops, but it is a law that is passed. And so that's a legal standard that is set. We move forward into Frank Cleckley. We then get to Herbert Henderson. These are African Americans, just like Thurgood Marshall, from a black high school, black communities who come from hard times and who pull themselves up by their bootstraps, but who are immersed in a community and a dynamic of intellectual conversations and dynamism. And so that's one thing I think we should mention about Thurgood Marshall. Yes, he was exceptional, but he also was surrounded by exceptional people that helped to support, nurture, guide, counsel. And so that's That's one thing that Frank Cleckley had growing up here. That's one thing that Herbert Henderson had growing up here. It's paradoxical when we talk about West Virginia because certainly there were challenges, there were Jim Crow prescriptions, but there was also progressiveness that existed
Here in
West Virginia, but it was compelled and by black agency that many times forced white legislators and the courts to adjust accordingly.
Another panelist at our event is Dr. Clinton Arnold, who is a professor of business and marketing at West Virginia State University. He says Thurgood Marshall's work has shaped his life, especially Marshall's work as the lead attorney for the NAACP on the Brown versus Board of Education case. That 1954 case resulted in the ruling that declared racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional.
So if you go back to my humble beginnings in Dayton, Ohio, where I grew up, my sister and I integrated the Catholic schools in Dayton, Ohio in 1972, which was after the brutal civil rights activities of the 50s and 60s, but it was still there. Because I can't tell you how many names I was called those early years until we got through the first few years and my parents said, "We're not leaving." But that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for some of the victories that we're talking about with Thurgood Marshall. That then propelled me or prepared me to go on to high school, Archbishop Alter High School, which again, it was me and 4 or 5 others in my graduating class of 330 that were African Americans in Dayton, Ohio. And then on to the University of Kentucky, where it was the same situation, where I got my undergraduate degree, 25,000 students, and there were 600 blacks on campus. And this was in 1982. So you're still looking at a small percentage every place that I've been, but if it weren't for some of these laws and the fights that were done back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, I may not have had the opportunity to compete. And that's what propelled me into my corporate career. And it was the same. It was always, every place that I've always been, it's always just been me and a couple of others everywhere. In fact, it's just, and so that became part of my life, but it was, at least I was enabled to be able to get my foot in the door, prove that I could compete with anybody. And then once you're able to prove yourself, there's still a fight. There's still a fight to keep proving yourself over and over and over again. And that's part of his legacy that we're talking about, is his persistence, the strategy, the tactics, the support, because nobody does anything on their own. I don't care how many people say I did it all by myself. Nobody does anything by themselves.
Much of Thurgood Marshall's work and legal legacy can be traced directly to his education. Marshall attended Lincoln University, the nation's first degree-granting historically black university. And that prepared him to attend Howard University's law school. Another clip from the documentary, Becoming Thurgood, America's Social Architect, highlights the importance of historically black colleges and universities, or HBCUs.
Lincoln sits about 5 miles from the Mason-Dixon line. So when we started, we were very close to slave state, which was Maryland. Even though we were a free state, the racism was rampant. And we had this free black community with a very active chapter of the Ku Klux Klan very close. To believe that you can start a school like Lincoln, offer baccalaureate degrees, focusing on rigorous liberal arts, in 1854, when most African Americans were in bondage, was about freedom. In the early days of the institution, the majority of the faculty who taught here were from Princeton, either from the undergraduate college or from the seminary. And so everything about Lincoln mimicked Princeton, the full curriculum and the focus on essential skills, especially communication skills.
Coming out of the enslavement period, there was this notion that African Americans would not be able to gain a higher education in white institutions, and that it was necessary for African Americans to provide for themselves, to educate themselves.
we're hearing a lot about how HBCUs, historical black colleges and universities, that in many ways that they were an engine for social change at the time. How did that translate here into Appalachia, into West Virginia?
My dad will tell you right now.
That's Cicero Jr.
That's Cicero Fain Jr. He will tell you right now, the best education one could ever get was at a black high school. I've had the great pleasure of working with Sandra Clemens on the Huntington Black History Banner Project, and to see the excellence that came through Douglas High across a variety of endeavors and disciplines, from being vice presidents to presidents of institutions or corporations. And it wasn't just the black high schools, it was the black community as well, the black churches as well. There was this interrelated web that we could argue has frayed in recent times. But I am proud to have been a son of a father and mother who went to Douglas High School, because that instilled a sense of dignity, pride, aspirational qualities, service.
An important figure in Thurgood Marshall's life was Charles Hamilton Houston, the dean of Howard University's School of Law. Another excerpt from the documentary outlines Houston's work attacking laws that supported segregation. People referred to him as the man who killed Jim Crow.
Charles Hamilton Houston tells his students, you will be basically a social activist using the law, or you will be a parasite. He wanted it to be an engine of change for the race. Houston embodied the two critical characteristics of a classic race man. One, an utter confidence in himself and his people. You will be excellent, you will work hard, you will excel, you will be the best of the best. And the second was sort of this agitator's creed, and you will take that talent and you will use it to improve the lives of other people.
The idea of the lawyer who spent 100% of their time working on civil rights cases was a 20th century innovation brought to us by Thurgood Marshall and later the team that he developed at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund.
That team was possible because the Howard University Law School saw the law as a tool for social change, with lawyers as social engineers. Litigation was their instrument. Our panelist, Patricia Proctor, is a longtime litigator and the founding director of Marshall University's Simon Perry Center for Constitutional Democracy. She says the drive for perfection in legal work is what wins cases.
Cases are won or lost based on application of law to evidence presented. Okay? The law is an exercise of application of existing law or existing doctrine to a set of facts, and facts are proven by evidence, okay? And so an appellate court is going to evaluate according to what was the burden of proof. Does it have to be more likely than not? Does it have to be beyond reasonable doubt or whatever? But was the evidence there that supports this finding that was made, or was it not? Well, in your case, you want to have everything in a record that will support the outcome that you need.
So that if you happen to be in a jurisdiction or before a judge who has a bias, perhaps a racial bias.
That could happen. Yes.
That
And did happen. Yeah.
Yes, it could happen.
Could happen. Yeah.
That you're going to have a solid record on appeal. And that's the strategy. I mean, am I getting that?
And I mean, there are many, many reasons why there are outcomes. Let's just say that you don't like the outcome. I mean, it wouldn't just be a biased judge. It could just be a mistake. It could be an application or an interpretation of law that you're arguing is not correct. I mean, there are many reasons why somebody can take an appeal. But the bottom line is that you have to have a record that will support with evidence the things that you, if you have a burden to prove, need to prove.
Clinton wanted to get it.
No, so from the legal perspective, yes. The level of perfection that was demanded is, I think, as important as getting the documentation correct. Because if you did have a judge that was biased, they're looking for a gap to say whatever you just discussed is not valid, and therefore none of it counts. So that is part of the training that the HBCUs probably gave those lawyers. The demanding the standard of perfection was, you have no choice. When you leave here, you have to be the best of the best of the best. You can't. You have to cross your T's, dot your I's, and you can't do it any other way.
But to that standard, I mean, like here you are at an HBCU.
Yeah.
I mean, are you as tough as Charles Hamilton Howard? I mean, do you exact that type of standard?
I'm probably not that brutal, but my expectations are, when I go through the theory of the marketing and the business and all the things that I teach, I then follow it up with, this is how this is going to work in the real world. And if you don't do A, B, C, and D, you will not survive in corporate America beyond an individual contributor level if most of you have expectations to become managers, directors, VPs, presidents, etc. Because if you make these mistakes, this is not going to be acceptable.
Cicero, I want you to get in here as well. Your expertise is really looking at the African American experience here in Appalachia. And I'm just, we've been talking about the HBCU experience, but this high standard of excellence that Marshall, I mean, is that something that we see in the wider Black community ecosystem?
I can't speak comprehensively on that, but I do want to say this.
Okay.
There's a part of that segment that talks about representing the race. That is a deep, embedded, articulated goal and vision and responsibility. Imagine the weight of that responsibility. It's one thing to go out there and be perfect within a legal realm to win cases. It's another thing to have the burden of you're representing the race.
Okay.
So that's
a lot of pressure.
That's pressure, and this, he is a representative and an exemplar of what's going on in that era. All these men and women were representatives of the race at a certain point in their lives. You know, unquestionably, part of my upbringing, I was cognizant of the fact that, yeah, I'm a high achiever. There's a responsibility that I have to give back, that I have a responsibility, the certain way to act and behave. That was molded and shaped by my family, by my church, by my community. And I took on that burden. I don't know if I was consciously aware of it, but at a certain point in time, that awakened to me that I have, at this stage of my life, I have a responsibility to give back and be representative.
But I just want to understand this. Again, yeah. I'm a white guy from Kanawha County. I certainly had people around me who were encouraging me to achieve.
Sure, but were you representing the white race?
But I wasn't representing the white race.
No, and part of my upbringing and a part of folks that I grew up with was, you have a goal. Yeah, there's something, you need to get out there and work hard to achieve it. Yeah, life is going to be unfair at times. Humble beginnings help shape you, mold you, and gird you for future advancement.
Our audience at the live event brought their own observations and experiences to the mix. A number of people offered thoughts and questions about Thurgood Marshall and his legacy. Sandra Clements is a lifelong resident of Huntington.
I attended Catholic school where most of the students were Black. Then I went on to St. Joe where most of the students were white. But from the time I was a little kid, 4 or 5 years old, my father embedded in me the fact that I am representing his family, his race, his people, and I had a responsibility to do that. No matter where I was, no matter what I was doing, I'm representing my father. And at no point was I ever to disappoint my father or be told by someone that I didn't do what I was supposed to do as a Black woman, I can't imagine how Thurgood Marshall felt when he was threatened. But I know how it feels. Every black person has been in that situation. Who in this room as a black person has not been threatened or harassed every day? And I don't want that to happen to my children, but I know that it will. So my job is to fortify my kids to be able to handle that. That is my responsibility, that we cannot stop this fight. We cannot stop the progress that has been made. We are not going to go back to what happened in slavery time. We have to fight.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Years ago on our show called Us and Them, we did an episode called The Black Talk. And the Black Talk was something that I didn't really know about. But it's you're nodding your head, but what I understood it was that when your children come to a certain age and they might have to encounter law enforcement, it was an instruction from your family, here's the way that you need to conduct yourself because we want you to come home alive. I feel like you've kind of told me maybe a different type of black talk, but did you also have the other type of discussion that I'm talking about?
The black talk is not just about interacting with the police. Black talk is interacting with people who don't look like you and who don't think like you. And so we have to be prepared. My kids had to be prepared for what was going to happen to them. That's the talk.
Another audience member, Dr. Alan Letton, wanted to talk about the culture that's created at HBCUs.
And I think one of the things that you don't know if you haven't been in an HBCU that's a predominantly black HBCU is that the community there is built around supporting you. And it's in things that you don't notice if you don't go to those institutions. For example, when you start thinking about the sororities and fraternities and the level of black excellence that they're demanding and the social structure that's created around that. When you start looking at things like I taught engineering, but in our aerospace engineering programs, all of our lab experiments, all of our case studies were done around black excellence, which you don't get in predominantly non-black universities.
This term, Black excellence, came up a few times in our conversation, and I asked Dr. Letton if he could help me understand what it means.
So black excellence means you're always given examples and opportunities to show where you're the best in any particular field, not equivalent. And so the way that you drive this sense of I'm carrying the burden of the race is you never show mediocrity. So if we're showing examples, so, Booker T. Washington, right, as the founder of Tuskegee, and when you're studying civil rights, when you're studying the transition from slavery to freedom, you actually look at the Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass letters, and you analyze them, and you talk about both the writing styles and the excellence and the communication, the research that's put into that. You look at it from a lens that only focuses on the best that's there. We looked at Langston Hughes, and you talk about developing programs around that, and you look at even in the music and arts, you're looking at that lens, so you never see an example that's any less than that. And so what you do at these HBCUs is create a culture that is always showing excellence and demanding that you come in with that excellence.
I'm so glad that you fleshed that out, and I really appreciate that.
The next person up to the mic poses a rhetorical question for our panelists. He wonders whether Thurgood Marshall would have had the same drive or impact on history if he had attended an integrated school instead of an HBCU.
I think the fire in the belly was born out of being born poor in Baltimore. I think the school was just a vehicle to tap into that, coalesce that energy, that intellect, and move forward.
Clint.
That's actually an interesting perspective because that was kind of me. I went to white schools from second grade all the way through college. But for the most part, you didn't have the majority of the kids that were probably capable of going to a Princeton or a Harvard. They weren't allowed in. So you use the one or the two that get the education, and then you bring it back to the HBCUs and train everybody else. So yeah, we let one in. They come in, and the Thurgood Marshalls of the world say, all right, it's my responsibility now to go take this and spread it back at the HBCU where the rest of my brothers and sisters are, so that they can then learn what I've learned, because they said that Howard was the basically Ivy League of the region, because it was, you had a few trained and now you train others. You kind of teach one, reach one, and then you spread from there. But I think that was the reason that happened. Was it wasn't because he wanted it to be that way. That's just the way it was. And because they weren't going to allow a majority of really smart black kids into those schools back then. So that's where they're representing the race, and then spreading the knowledge. Once you get out, once you learn, then you teach others.
Howard became great after Charles Hamilton Houston became the dean and built a faculty and helped it become as great as it became. He was a product of Harvard. So he is exactly what Dr. Arnold's talking about, and he excelled in his education. He was a top student. He was on the Harvard Law Review. He was as excellent could be. And I think that the kind of drive that he had and that Marshall had, there's something internal about it too. We might not all do anything by ourselves, but people who really are super high achievers have their own drive, their own determination, and their own skills and intelligence that they bring to the task and determination. And I think that Thurgood Marshall had that. And I think he would have been Thurgood Marshall as long as he had access to the education, wherever the education was. He was Thurgood Marshall.
When we come back from a quick break, we'll continue to explore how Marshall's legacy has shaped West Virginia and beyond, as well as some of the current attacks on equality, and what efforts behind diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to our panelists.
The purpose of DEI was not to fill quotas. It was basically to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be considered, to get their foot in the door and compete.
I've watched a lot of film of Justice Marshall being interviewed and talking about things, and even in the darkest times in our society, Justice Marshall would turn and say, look at how far things have come. You cannot give up. You have to continue to fight for what is right. You have to believe in justice.
That's coming up after a break. You're listening to Us and Them. This program is supported in part with a grant from the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation and the CRC Foundation.
In difficult times, music gives us peace, brings us together, and helps heal us. It calms our nerves and brightens our days. That's why we're bringing you classic episodes of Mountain Stage on air and in our podcast. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find something that's familiar or brand new and feel the power of live music on our website, mountainstage.org.
Hey, it's Trey, and this is Us and Them from PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. We're with an audience at Marshall University screening clips from a Maryland public television documentary called Becoming Thurgood, America's Social Architect. It highlights the life and legacy of former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. As the documentary explains, Marshall's cases drew crowds of black people who would pack into the balconies of segregated courtrooms.
You would have black people come from miles and miles away to sit up in those Jim Crow balconies and watch a black man in a suit arguing law with white people. And you'd see these bigoted white prosecutors kind of be enamored with Marshall. He was a spectacle.
Black folk, they would sometimes ride into the local courthouse on mules and horses. The night before, they would pack a lunch. They wanted their sons and daughters to see this black figure. It was like he had dropped from heaven.
Whatever was going on, people said, don't worry, Thurgood's coming.
Audience members shared their personal experiences during our recent live event, and they also brought questions for our panelists.
Hi, I'm Cameron Perdue. I'm a student at Spring Valley. How do you think Thurgood Marshall's legal strategies and personal courage continue to influence the fight for not only just justice, but equality today?
Dr. Clinton Arnold, who's a professor of business and marketing at West Virginia State University, offered some thoughts about that.
As I was preparing for this, there's kind of four themes that kind of carry forward from way back then to today. So he fought for equal justice under the law. Education as a foundation for social equity. Expanding civil rights beyond race. Means it's for everybody. He didn't just fight for black people, but anybody who was underserved, underprivileged. And the moral imperative of a living constitution to make sure that it applies to everybody, not just a select few. So I think that is actually become more paramount with what's happening today. It's more of an imperative with what he fought for and how he fought for it strategically, tactically, and with persistence to make sure that we don't lose a lot of what was gained all during those years, because it's there are attempts obviously to strip a lot of that away this day and age.
I don't want to call you out or have you answer anything that's uncomfortable, but what you're talking about is the whole idea of criticizing DEI. Is that generally?
No, that's part of it. If you think about the cases that he won, right, it was not to give anything away. It was to expand opportunity and not just talk about it. Expand opportunity for all those that had been basically alienated or not allowed to participate in the American dream. The purpose of DEI was not to fill quotas. It was basically to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be considered, to get their foot in the door and compete. The whole purpose of affirmative action was not to give anybody anything, because I can tell you from personal experience, I didn't want anybody to give me crap. All I wanted to do is you give me an opportunity to compete, and I'll beat you 7 days a week and twice on Sunday. But if you tell me that I can't, and you don't ever have the opportunity to do that, then that's a different issue, and that's what he was fighting for those years.
Patricia, did you want to get in here?
Yeah. Something that I think is really important to know about Justice Marshall is he completely believed that eventually, if he continued to present rational, solid argument and reasoning about the law, which was the Equal Protection Clause in this case, that eventually people would see reason and he could win. And he believed that in the face of what must have appeared to be almost insurmountable odds. Because we weren't talking simply about a disagreement about what a law meant, and we weren't talking simply about I want to be equally considered for an opportunity. We were talking about life and death risk that he took to go dangerous places and make his cases and represent people and fight for justice. I've watched a lot of film of Justice Marshall being interviewed and talking about things, and even in the darkest times in our society, Justice Marshall would turn and say, look at how far things have come. You cannot give up. You have to continue to fight for what is right. You have to believe in justice.
Much of Thurgood Marshall's work was leading up to one of the biggest cases of his career, Brown versus Board of Education. This excerpt from the documentary Becoming Thurgood explains the basis of the NAACP's argument that separate but equal is inherently unequal.
Brown v. Board of Education desegregated the public school system, but it did more than that, of course. It showed all of white America that they needed to start thinking of blacks as fellow citizens, first-class citizens, and not second-class citizens going through certain doors, using certain bathrooms.
When Brown was decided, 1954, it was a huge, powerful win, for sure. But we all know what came immediately after.
The white citizens' councils had promised to picket on the opening day of school.
I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
While many in the black community saw the Brown ruling as a triumph, it sparked violent resistance in some cities and towns. And while Brown versus the Board of Education is often taught as a clean victory, it was anything but. I asked Dr. Cicero Fain, who's the assistant provost for inclusive excellence at Marshall University, what the aftermath was like in West Virginia.
I have a dear friend, a scholar, who wrote her dissertation on, one of her chapters is on West Virginia's education, and it's about, she really encapsulates West Virginia's was more of a desegregation as opposed to integration. And I know personally of folks who had great difficulty in dealing with white teachers because white teachers did not recognize their humanity, their intellect, or any of their qualities. And so for many black people, that presented to them a sense of indignation at having to endure and adjust and adapt to people who did not even want to give them the time of day. You look at the bigger picture and you think this is going to be a vehicle, this decision will move, the race will benefit from it. We also have to remember the second part of that Brown's decision, in which the Supreme Court said, essentially, with all deliberate speed, to implement this. Black people thought it would be immediate. White people said, no, this is an opportunity for us to delay and delay and delay. And I do believe the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system, 17 years later, was still segregated. And while there were school systems in the South who definitely immediately did integrate, this decision resulted in massive white resistance. I don't think any black person really thought at that time the scope of the vitriol and the anger that decision would ensue.
One audience member at our recent live event, Marie Redd, became the first African American state senator for West Virginia in 1998. She says as a young child, she attended black schools. Once she went to high school, things were very different.
The rude awakening came in 1968 when I went to Huntington High. Now, my cousin had preceded me and everyone had preceded me, but the day of school, and they're standing out on 10th Avenue and 8th Street, hollering 2468. We don't want to integrate. Ends go back to Africa. I was like, I've never been to Africa. My family, I am the 5th generation of college-educated persons in my family. 5 generations. As Sandra said, who's a former city council person here in Huntington, it was the atmosphere in our homes that kept us going. It's not if you go to college, it's when you go to college. My dad walked into my bedroom and he said, "Girl," I said, "Yes, Daddy. You have 2 choices." I said, "Yes, Daddy. You go to work or you go to school." "Daddy, I'm going to school." I knew that was what I was going to do. And my children have graduated from college. You see, it's all about what you come up with, what your family, you talked about that, what your family puts into you. Because we were always at a disadvantage to a certain extent. You see what I'm saying? So you only had what you had at home to take you forward. Thank you.
The work of Thurgood Marshall demonstrates the law as a tool to dismantle institutional racism and inspire social reforms. Another clip from the documentary Becoming Thurgood highlights the force of courts to create change.
When there are changes happening in your country, when there's unrest, when there's unfairness, people look to lawyers for the answer. So law and lawyers are very important tools in the toolbox of the very long, many hundred years quest of Black people to be free and full citizens in this country. Now, it is not exclusive of protest, of boycott, of scholarship, of journalism. Black people have needed all of those things, of art, to forge a path of liberation. But none of it works without law.
I think it's just an astounding goal that he set for himself, to break apart laws and then stitch the Black family into the fabric of the American flag.
He successfully argued not just Brown, but 32 cases before the Supreme Court and won 29 of them. And many of those victories knocked down planks of Jim Crow.
Those Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation for decades, and the notion of separate but equal was in place until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Patricia Proctor, with Marshall University's Simon Perry Center for Constitutional Democracy, says Thurgood Marshall's legacy built legal precedents slowly, one case at a time.
We're living in a moment when some of those civil rights gains feel under threat. Mm-hmm. How should we understand Marshall's legacy of incremental process in a time when many of those achievements seem to be getting rolled back?
For one thing, I think Marshall did more through his achievements to change American society. The change was lasting. The change, I think, is forever. I think we live in a different world in 2025 than the world that existed in 1950. And it is because when Marshall tried Brown, one of the things, the case had to be re-argued. It was argued twice. And one of the questions that the justices had was, well, what about like the danger and the controversy that will arise? What if there are problems when there's integration? And he said, I don't think there will be. I think that is what's going to lead to problems getting better when children are able not to part ways and go to different schools, but to go to the same one and know each other as classmates, as friends, as people who know you have these formative experiences together. I think there's truth to that. I think we have a lot of issues in our society, but I also think that the great majority of Americans believe in a world where everybody has rights. I believe that is part of what most people believe in today. And I don't think that can be taken away easily. We believe we have rights in America, and someone may threaten those rights, but I believe that society at large will be determined that those rights must be preserved and respected. And I don't know what the end looks like, but I think that just like Marshall, we have to play a long game in this world. We have to say, this is the goal, and there may be steps to getting there. We may not get everything we want all at one time, but that doesn't mean that you don't continue to go to that goal. And I think that is the legacy that you're referring to.
My name is Jaden Sullivan. I'm a political science major here at Marshall University. And just seeing Thurgood and all he's been able to do is just so inspiring. But how, as someone who wants to be a lawyer in the future and just a student as a whole, how do we continue to fight for civil rights when we have an administration and a Supreme Court who is so willing to kind of fight against that? How, as a young person, do I step into that and fight? It feels like everything's against us.
Clint, looks like you're teeing up.
So that's part of the reason we're sitting here is we have to take inspiration from, you look at what happened in the past because that's a good indication of a roadmap on how do we be successful in the future. We just have to do it a little bit differently now. So here in West Virginia, where you have 97% of the legislation is all Republican and they're leaning a certain direction, but that doesn't mean that we give up the fight. I think you have to keep pounding away, being persistent, because that's what Thurgood Marshall did. Despite seeing a noose, he didn't tuck his tail and go away. He got out of town, he got some help, and he kept on fighting. He kept on arguing the cases. He kept on being excellent and perfect in all of his briefings so that he won 29 out of the 32 cases that he had an opportunity to fight for. And I think that's what each one of us have to do, me included, is what's our part in the wheel, and do it. I don't know how else to say it. It's like each one of us have to figure out what is our part in the wheel and do it. So if yours is going to be a lawyer, if mine is as a professor at West Virginia State University and running a nonprofit or whatever else I do, then I have to do that to the best of my ability to make sure that we get equality in education and give everybody the ability to achieve the American dream.
Here's another thing to think about. The law is not just in a courtroom. We have lawmakers that we need to try to influence who they are to see if they agree with our values, and we need to find people who do and help empower them to make fairer laws or to keep laws that we need to have kept. So that's important, like organizing and supporting people who will enact and respect fair laws. And then this sounds flippant, but it isn't meant to be. I mean, things are done one case at a time. Okay, I mean, this incremental approach, you have to deal with an injustice right in front of you when you're a lawyer that's affecting somebody that you're representing, and you just look for a way. Like, how can we pursue this? And so, yes, the big picture is important, but the small victories can add up to big victories.
Reflecting on Thurgood Marshall's life and career, it becomes clear his impact was not limited to any single case or courtroom victory. His legacy shapes the ongoing fight for a fairer America. Here's how Clinton Arnold sees it.
His legacy wasn't just confined to the courtroom. It was a lifelong mission to make America live up to the words that it proudly declares, that doesn't always hold true. He fought not to give anybody anything, but to remove the barriers that kept a lot of people from competing fairly for the promise that's embedded in our Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So if you look at today's efforts, both overt and subtle, to dismantle a lot of the progress that Marshall and generations of the people that fought for all of it built, we can't stop, we can't retreat. We have to respond with the same strategic focus, the moral courage, and the disciplined persistence that defined his life. We honor him not by thinking about what it's doing, but we have to continue to take action by ensuring that law and order, we hear that a lot, means justice and equity. The economic growth is inclusive, that every child, regardless of their zip code, color of their skin, race, creed, religion, receives the tools to compete, contribute, and to thrive. So I think if we do this, we have to do our work strategically and tactically. And his life reminds us that progress is not automatic or permanent. It must be defended, advanced, and renewed by each one of our generations. And we're in another generation where we're basically having to fight again, and it's not going to go away. So if we do this with the unity, we'll not only protect his legacy, but we'll help extend it, help us shape America to the way that it truly needs to be.
As we end here tonight, I keep returning to something implied throughout this film. None of this progress was inevitable. It happened because people believed progress was possible and then acted like it was necessary. Each generation gets its chance to decide whether we move forward or fall back. I thank you for being a part of this conversation and for keeping this work alive.
You've been listening to Us and Them. Our team for this episode was me, Trey Kay, Samantha Gatzik, and Kate Smith. Special thanks to Dr. Cicero Fain III, Dr. Clinton Arnold, and Patricia Proctor, who helped me plan this event. Additional thanks to Marshall University and the Brad D. Smith Center for Business and Innovation for hosting us. Kevin Bannon recorded this event, and Ryan Vance helped us coordinate all the technical aspects. Thank you to my colleague, Americo Valdez, and my colleagues at West Virginia Public Broadcasting, and to Maryland Public Television, Alexis Agri, and the team behind Becoming Thurgood for creating a documentary that brings this history to life with such clarity and heart. Michael Lipton, Tristan Lozow, and Ahmed Solomon wrote and performed the Us and Them show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The marvelous people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation and the CRC Foundation. Hey, we'd love to get your thoughts about this episode. Would you share them with us on our Facebook page or on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Us Them Podcast. Us and Them was originally developed with assistance from the mentorship program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.